in the NHS, we've been working towards net zero in lots of ways, just like you have been in councils. But we've one of the ways we're working on getting the estate to zero is we've got a team called NH Power who are trying to get collaboration between trusts. So there are all kinds of initiatives taking place, which I'll show you in a minute. And what we're exploring today is whether we can work closely with councils, because we've realized that many of the solutions to net zero would be better if we worked with our councils. Okay, so the idea is really is heat decarbonisation through collaboration, and I'm trying to find out whether councils want to work with us, the NH Power team. We're the kind of the grease in the gearbox to assist with working with their NH partner sites. I mean, I'm sure you're doing what you're doing with your whole council area and your hospitals, but if you want our help, and we can help, then that's what we'd like to do. So today I'll do a quick briefing about what's going on in the NHS. I'll do it up till about 12 o'clock. I'll discuss the mapping of the site, the main routes to net zero, interest in try and seek about your interest in collaborating. I'll show you a draft way forward, and then at 12 o'clock we'll take questions in there while we wait for 12 o'clock, and then Trust will join us at 12 o'clock. I'll introduce again briefly, so I'm sorry you get a bit near me again, and then we'll hand over to David, who's about the funding. So if you're not aware, the NHS has an action plan. I'm sure you have one too, trying to deal with the enormous footprint that the NHS has and all its sites. The problem we're trying to deal with is heat, because the grid is greening. We hope it's going to continue greening now, but our biggest part of our state's footprint comes from heat, and I imagine that's a problem to you too. So the NHS strategy is to do lots of good things in the building, like you're doing. Within our patch, our site, we're going to put on solar cells, and we're going to do all this fantastic stuff. But you can only go so far. We've been doing this. I've personally been involved in the NHS since 1995, and this year we'll get our first 2 hospitals net zero ready, i.e., completely electrified. So we've been at it a long time, and we aren't there. But the interesting part of the slide is the 2 little pipes that disappear at the bottom left-hand side there, which relate to district heating source. So off the site is where NH Power comes in. We're trying to do the off-site business, be it geothermal or hydrogen or working with the council or district heating or anything else. So whilst the NHS goes on, and people like the Carbon Energy Fund, who David manages, are helping trusts busy electrify what's on the site. So that's their bag. Our bag is the off-site business. And we've been enormously helped by this man who looks a bit like Riff Raff in the Rocky Horror Show. Just without the hump. He's Dr. Kieran Mullen. He's a genuine doctor from Mid-Cheshire area. He's also an MP for a few weeks more, and he's led an all-party group and released a paper. That's the link to his paper. It's not bad, about geothermal, and he's standing there next to a wellhead, a geothermal wellhead in Munich, and his paper describes different ways of geothermal. He's the champion for geothermal heat in Parliament. He's done a report for the Prime Minister. Don't ask me which Prime Minister, we seem to have a lot of them. And he's been extremely helpful. And the nice thing he's done is we are a state, so we aren't very important in the scheme of things. But he's been able to knock on some very senior doors for us, and we've gone with him on it, and he's talked to Treasury, he's talked to the Department of Health, NHS England at a level we haven't got access to, and he's given us a lot of success for it. So I ideally wish he was still around. In fact, I've tried to persuade him to continue helping us, but I don't know whether he will. Then the other thing we've got is in the NHS, we've mapped all the sites that use more than 10 million units of heat a year. That's by no means all our sites. Beyond this, like councils, it's an onion. You've got some big ones, and then smaller ones, and smaller ones, and smaller ones. There are thousands of buildings, but we're starting with the 209 biggest ones that use more than 10 million units, and I'm trying to get those to net zero by 2032. So we're working on those primarily. And we've got them all on a map, and we've worked out the way each one can get to net zero. Some of them have got more than one way to get to net zero. And we work with all of them to try and get them there. So we're looking at hydrogen, geothermal, all kinds of things. And you can see if you click the various boxes on the left, they show you different trusts and different solutions. So that's how we've mapped the whole lot. And for us, I'm sure you've got an enormous task too, but our task is we've got targets for 2032 and 2040 that are binding, and we've got to get a 47% reduction by 2032, which is the point A in the little red graph there. The grey thing is our existing footprint, the state's footprint, and you can see we will get it down a bit, but the way we're going at the moment, we have no way of getting to A. And then we've got to get by 2038 ready for 2040. So we've got to get 73 and then 80. So you can see, sorry, 100% by then. So you could just see what the effect is. So there's steps in this program. So B for 2038 is the next target for us. And you'll see we're just not going to get there. The reason the curve really goes down at all is really because of the electrification of the grid. So we'll be a long way short if we don't do something. And I'm sure you have similar problems. So looking at the top trust, trying to get them to A and B. If we do things that we do on the graph at the right, we have a chance of hitting those particular targets. And there is a certain uncertainty about it, which is why you see the 2 yellow lines. So you can see the different paths that make it up. And we've put in also some idea of the timescales required to do each of the options to try and get us into the target. So this is all going on, but you can see it's a tall order. If you draw a graph, the blue graph down the middle of the two options, you can see we missed the target. So we've got a lot to do. Looking at the database, the routes we're looking to net zero obviously electrification, which largely means heat pumps. So we've got a couple of trusts trying to drive electric boilers off solar and other weird things like that. So the main routes to get a site to net zero is to take geothermal energy. It does leave you with a residual electrical load, but hospitals have quite large electrical loads, and a lot of them are in grid constrained areas. So just getting a few extra megawatts of capacity is within the timescale is very difficult. Geothermal has a very high VOP, typically 18 or better. So it's a good route for trusts that can make it. Electrification, we've done a number already. We've got 2 will be completely electrified this year, and we've got another bunch that are partly electrified. So that's a route, but it has its problems. District energy is a great way if whoever's got the district energy has a green source of energy into it. So it's a way of riding on somebody else's coattails, which I think is something we can do to mutual benefit here. And then we're looking at largely at hydrogen. We are looking at electrification to some extent, electrolysis to some extent, but not a lot because there isn't a lot of that. HAR 1 has been delayed and delayed further with the election, but we do have some HAR 1 schemes. It could feed hospitals, but it's a slow process, and it's also funny to turn electrical into hydrogen. It just seems a funny way of doing things. And in Ireland, biomethane is looking quite good. And we've got the hydrogen coming from natural gas or oil. And both hydrogen and biomethane have, let's say, slightly dodgy credentials, and you'll have your own opinion about them. But if we do believe that the government will keep the hydrogen and make them clean up and all the hydrogen will get in the ground, then it's an option. And if all the biomethane comes from sources that would have put methane to atmosphere, then I suppose burning it is kind of green. So the last option has some question marks on it, but we're not, in the end, we're doing the best we can do, and we appreciate that other people have got to do their jobs as well. So I think I passed one by before. Can I go page up? So the initial hydrogen site, the site to get hydrogen shown in the map on the right here. This is 2 other maps showing the potential geothermal site. So what we did is we put the locations of all the big trusts through the BGS, the British Geological Survey database. And we also put the rough map, the coloured map from BGS on the database as well. And you can see there are sites in areas that aren't coloured. So geothermal potential is slightly strange, and the maps, the general coloured maps, aren't that useful as an indicator of whether you've got a geothermal option or not. The BGS reckons all those have an option. We're pursuing the trust with that option. We've financially modelled it and all the rest of it, and we're going to do this second. We set 5 trusts went for procurement about a year ago. That was Preston, which is a problem because they have a queue for a new hospital. Wythenshawe, which is going gangbusters. Salisbury is going well. Southampton's a bit slow because they got 30 million of grant that they're distracted by. And Eastbourne, which is intermediate depth, is going quite well. So that's geothermal on the left. And then the right-hand side are tough nuts. Those are the sites that don't have access to hydrogen, and they don't have geothermal according to BGS. But that said, we've now tracked down a closed loop geothermal system, which is deeper and less like ground source heat pumps, but it does involve heat pumps. So we've got that technology, and we are looking to put that into some of the sites that are the tough nuts. The heat network pilot cities where you guys are involved are shown. You know where they are, and you know whether you're one of them. And we've invited all those councils to these talks. Plus, I've added in some councils that are close to NHS trusts that are considering geothermal. So we've invited everyone from those councils, plus a few extras. And then, you know, there on the right-hand side, we've got all the trusts with more than an extra hectare. Because we could put electrolysis there, we might be able to put solar on that land, and there might be potential for some work that requires land. So land can be an issue, and we've had luck. You know, at New Cross, we've worked with the council. They made a covered over dump available to the trust. We put 6 megawatts of solar, or the Carbon Energy Fund put 6 megawatts of solar on that, and that's feeding a private wire into New Cross Hospital. So that's an example of collaboration. There's also Carbon Energy Fund also put a district heating service in Manchester Central, and there are a few others. There's one in Aberdeen, there's one in London, and I probably missed some others out. Go on to hydrogen for a minute. We've been working largely with the shippers. Cadent have been very helpful. This lady, Sally Brewis, has been particularly helpful. There's an awful lot of writing about hydrogen, which you can read about. The important thing for me is the hydrogen production business model, which says that the government will subsidize the cost of hydrogen in the way it subsidizes wind energy through pushing up everybody else's price for gas. So bad news if you're stuck with gas, good news if you've got the option to go to hydrogen, because you won't have an extra revenue cost associated with it. That said, there does seem to be a wrinkle, because we thought that the hydrogen would exclude CCL, because why would you have CCL on the hydrogen price? But it looks now that they're going to equalize the prices and just quietly ignore the CCL, so not quite as good as we hoped. Apart from the electrolysis and the HAR1 and possible HAR2 electrolysis schemes, there are 5 major hydrogen from fossil fuel schemes, and they basically fall in the maps shown there. And the ones that are reliable in the sense that they look like they'll produce hydrogen that we can actually get our hands on, the HyNet's the first. East Coast hydrogens are looking pretty good as well. And there may be some life in the Hydrogen Valley system as well. So we're working closely with Cadent and the producers to see what the timescales are, because I can't rely on hydrogen until I know it's going to come. So I can't spend any money until I know it's definitely going to come. We'll probably start to spend money when the government spends money. So when the government starts repurposing and funding the actual conversion, then we'll ask the NHS to fund their one. So that's kind of the plan for them. But for instance, Teesside is quite a good geothermal area. Liverpool's quite a good geothermal area. So we might find trusts go for other methods to net zero. There's a map of the HyNet system. They're concentrating, like all the hydrogen people are, on industry, but the NHS has, through us, have managed to work their way into it, and we're on the program. So that is HyNet. The East Coast hydrogen here is actually two areas. It splits at the Humber in the middle there. So above the Humber, it's Northern Gas Networks, who are repurposing gas pipelines to hydrogen. So that will actually be one of the best areas for hydrogen. And then below the Humber, it's a mixture of repurposed and new, so it's a bit slower. And there are all kinds of numbers about who's buying in and how much they're going to buy and how much they're going to make and all the rest of it, which is very impressive. I hope it happens. And then just because I don't want to leave the South out, the capital hydrogen fed from the huge Beckton energy hub looks like it's coming along, and they are talking about repurposing gas. So we might get hydrogen we can count upon in London, but I wouldn't count on it. The NHS at the moment is not relying on that for any trust in London yet. If it improves, then we'll jump ship and join them. So the current list of hospitals which have the potential to get hydrogen within our windows are these ones. The ones on the right are the Northwest Trust. So if you're a council near any of those hospitals, hydrogen's an option for you. Probably not to your sites directly because the piping just won't be ready. But if you were to share energy and join some sort of district heating with the nearest hospital, then you can get hydrogen that way. So, for instance, one of the hospitals in the left-hand column, which is Northern Gas Networks, the Leeds hospitals, and I can't get hydrogen to the Leeds hospitals, but I can get them to the waste energy district heating system in Leeds. So if I can persuade the hospitals to join the DE scheme, if anybody from Leeds is on, then I can get hydrogen to the hospital. So that's the kind of hop, skip and jumping we're trying to do to make these things work. And in the middle, we have the East Coast hydrogen, Queen's Medical Centre, Nottingham, and the rest of them there. So if you're close to any of those, you have a chance of benefiting from hydrogen. Why do I like hydrogen? Well, I don't like a lot about hydrogen, about the fossil fuel elements. What I do like is the price matching, the fact that you can have CHP, combined heat and power, off hydrogen. And if you're a steam hospital, and a lot of these are, well, probably about 30 to 40 of them are steam hospitals, then I don't need to convert them to low temperature hot water first, which I have to do with all the other technologies. So I'll do a little bit on geothermal. I'm watching the time a bit, but we've had BGS involved. The geothermal energy is getting energy out the ground, which they tell me isn't just us cooling.
Right up the stairs,
no. Sorry, would you mind muting? I know we're all taking calls and things. We're all multitasking, but if you'd mute, that'd be very handy. So the geothermal comes not only from the core of the Earth, but also from the sun shining on the Earth and the decay of material. So it's to some degree renewable. Okay. The sort of types of geothermal are the sketch on the right, starting with ground source heat pumps on the left hand, most of those 5 options, going through coal mines, which are tricky but possible in some areas, through to the deep geothermals, which are the aquifer, which is the most common, basins, which we're treating together. We have some that are basins, and then we've got 3 hospitals which can take energy from the metamorphic rocks, but only 3, and it's not a very strong option for the NHS. It gives forth the temperatures on the left-hand side. Those 3 trusts might well get temperatures in the green arrow area and be able to do more than just heat from it, but I wouldn't count on that too much. We're not. So everything else, we're looking at hot sedimentary aquifers that are in the BGS database. So that's the 113 hospitals, which you guys could join in with. Or if you can use the Seraphy system, which I'll come to in a second, then you can get temperatures which are not that dissimilar from ground source heat pump, but a bit higher and a bit better COP out of them. So here is the white paper done by BGS. We ran all the sites through it. There are all the different basins. If you haven't got access to the paper or can't find it on their website, I can send you the link. The granite they show in the so-called red area, I'm a bit colorblind, so all their colors leave me a little bit still, but there you are. And the opportunities within basins are very, very site specific. So there's a whole 2-year process before you can actually drill there to try and get the risks under control. And there they've looked at the carbon potential of those things, and the carbon savings can be enormous. The small part of the database they gave us, you can see the hospitals, the size of the little circles are the size of the opportunity as BGS see it, and they've given us drilling depth and all that kind of stuff, which are helpful, but only indicative. And the carbon savings from geothermal they've calculated, and it's enormous. So 1.3 to 22.7 kilotons of CO2 per hospital site. So enormous. Geothermal is very promising. Okay, and they're very proud of the one that's new, and I took trust to see this earlier this week up in North Yorkshire. There's a trial well. Therapy put a sealed well down, so it doesn't interact with the ground at all. It just uses the temperature associated with depth, and they circulate water down and up, and that gives you sufficient to give you 45-degree water, which is what NHS is designing buildings to run off in the future. So these new hospitals that may or may not ever happen are designed to run off 45-degree water, so they can run directly off these wells. But the remnant estate has to use heat pumps to boost it up. So it's quite useful. Therapy are a bit optimistic. They reckon they could get you steam and higher temperatures, but I wouldn't believe it. We don't believe it. From talking councils, there's quite an important thing for councils, because once people start electrifying their big users and putting heat pumps in, then the potential for buying energy off a DE scheme gets less and less, to the point where you can no longer make it add. So I will get a wiggle on. So you need to think about the extent to which you electrify and use heat pumps, or whether you want to, whether you can think you might get hydrogen, or whether you can take heat from a hospital, because DE schemes need scale to make them work. We have a trial scheme going on at Rotherham, where we're taking waste heat from one side of town, councils involved in that, hospitals at the other end. It's currently struggling from the hospital end because we've struggled to get the return temperatures down. You really want them 73 degrees or below to make DE work, because district heating's run 85 degrees. If you don't get the return temperatures down, you can't get the heat through the system. Okay, funding we're going to talk about next. So at 12 o'clock, I will shortly after that, I'll hand over to David Mackey, and he will do the funding bit. The action plan that I could offer you is, if you were prepared to indicate you want to work with a trust, we'll set up a kickoff meeting with them. If you've already done that, we're quite happy that the whole team hook up with us so that they can use things like the funding that we're trying to get together. But if they haven't talked to them, we'll do our best to set up kickoff meetings and discuss the way forward during the summer. And those that are already doing things, there's still benefits of collaboration. There's information, resource sharing, access to people like David who have the funding, and shared documentation. We've done a lot of financial modelling, which I'm sure we could extend to councils. But we've got face-to-face workshops coming up in Manchester in October, which you could come to, and we try and get you face-to-face with the people involved. And it's about a 4-year program, to do these things from when you start. So if you like we are constrained by a date, then we can't leave it too long. And then once you've got through your 4-year process, you'll enter into a power purchase agreement of one sort or another. Okay, why should we collaborate? Well, we've all got the same problems. We've all got lots of buildings. Most are too small, for geothermal or something. So we've got to share it. We've got to pipe energy around, then let's all get involved and all share it. There's resource issues, and I don't know about you, but before we can procure, we now need to go to Cabinet Office under the newly tightened rules. There's endless bureaucracy that needs to be dealt with. Balance sheet treatment is very important. Scale makes everything cheaper and better, and geography is king in a lot of this stuff. So the next steps for you, I haven't left much time for projects. I will look at the the chat when David's talking, and I'll try and answer some questions in the chat. And we'll have a Q&A session at the end, both finance and any questions you've got for me, because I've tended to use up my time. Next steps, express your interest, bring in the interesting parties you have to the scheme if they want to. We'll happily talk to them and tell them what's going on. We'll take the next step with trusts if you're struggling to engage with them or want our help. And if you've already got a partnership that's on its way, you can join this anyway, and we'll try and help you and include you in what we've got. We are running a procurement, and this year we ran one a year or so ago. The geothermal will be end of June. It's probably too late for you guys to join in immediately, but I can, if you've expressed an interest, tell you if your trust getting involved is and get you involved. Okay, it's 11:58, as I've talked a bit longer than I meant to. We've got NHS people in the queue, and Vanessa's going to start letting them in now. So you'll see people joining. I'm looking down the questions. Does the Excise consider any new hospitals by the National Health Hospital Programme? Yes, we are considering them, and we are trying to work with them. I won't say that they're necessarily making it easy, but we are working with them as the best we can. Is it taking account of any manifesto pledges? I'll tell you the truth. I haven't read any manifestos, and I don't know whether we're doing it, but the manifesto people haven't spoken to us. Costs are being issued. Can we connect to existing district schemes or develop multiple wells in a single city for a larger proportion of the heat, both public sector district heating schemes? So the idea is the NHS will not drill our holes and put the geothermal system in, and the NHS will not build an entire system. What we're going to do is we're going to procure people to do that, and the people who we procure hopefully will work in partnership with you and the hospitals, and they will put in the piping and the well, if there's a well, and the rest of it, and you can take off that. So you should be able to, if we need more wells, we'll put them in. We'll ask them to interface with individual users and bill them and stuff, unless you want to be part of the scheme. And when you look at David's presentation, he'll show you a way where you could actually be inside the scheme. Okay. And it may be discussed in a separate meeting we can do, but we might pick it up in finance. Can I welcome the NHS to this meeting? You're joining a meeting that's been underway since 11:30 with some councils. We are filming this, so if you're bashful about having your face appear in the pictures, please just turn off your camera. And the talk is being run by NH Power. If you wouldn't mind muting your microphone until Q&A, you can put your questions on the website, but on the chat. But we will, if we can, take some verbally. So we'll see how that works. I'll try and shut up quickly by getting through my slides. So it's a 12:01, so I'll dive in, even if people have been delayed and are a few minutes late. So you're joining a call, session's being recorded, Q&A at the end on the chat. And the funding models that are coming up next have not been done by the collaboration NH Power. The Carbon Energy Fund are a sponsor of the work we're doing, and they've gone ahead and they've worked with Dr. Mullen and who knows who else. I'm sure they'll tell you in a minute. But David Mackey on the call will explain to you what they've been doing and how they're doing it. Just a brief intro. What are we talking about when we talk about funding? Well, we've all been working on energy conservation, but it doesn't get you to net zero. There are four basic ways to get to net zero. Electrify your site, be that electrical heating, which is a bit weird, or heat pumps, and then just wait for the grid to green, and hopefully it will. Geothermal energy, be it ground sourced, shallow-ish, closed loop systems, a kilometre or so and a half, like the Kerrifi system, or aquifers or hot rocks, as BGS has shown us. You can join somebody else's net zero system, which is district heating basically, where somebody else greens that and you take their green heat. And that doesn't mean you can't have your own district heating or electrification or net zero fuel and supply heat to somebody else. So district heating goes both ways. Can people just mute if you're on the call, just so we don't get any funny noises? So, and then the last method is to use biomethane, hydrogen, or pyrolyzed gas. We're actually looking at a technology you can put on site that you put gas into it. Out of it comes pretty clean hydrogen and rather a lot of carbon black, which you can sell or your contractor can sell for you. So that's the way to get to net zero. Who needs funding? What needs funding? Well, there's the capital cost. Some of these are more capital intensive than others, but you want to cover the installation, the connection, and all on costs associated with project management and everything else that needs that capital. There's revenue, that be that O&M, operation maintenance during the life of the thing, life cycling plant that's got a limited lifetime, and repaying any capital. And to some extent, these are actually interchangeable, because if you put more capital in, you can drop the revenue. If you put more revenue, you can drop the capital or even stop it altogether. So those are, we're able to, or the Carbon Energy Fund are able to swap those around. There are some principles in the NHS that may be similar to councils who are also on this call. We've got no capital, which in the NHS we call CDEL, which is delegated capital. There is no or little or no additional revenue in trust budgets. To be honest, they want to spend less. But the trust would like insulating or insulation from the energy market volatility. This last year has really hurt. The Ukraine war has really hurt. We really can't have more NHS assets because they go on balance sheet, and that attracts costs and all kinds of other problems for us. So balance sheet treatment's been very important. And then grants are very good, you know, and the Carbon Energy Fund, David will probably tell you, have received an awful lot of PSDS grants, which we put in hospitals, and then we can get network funding for parts of the district heating and the rest of it. But that's something we tend to get our contractors to do for us. And then there are all kinds of stuff, rules. I don't know what our councils have, but in NHS, procurements need approval, so I'm busy writing the business case to Cabinet Office to allow us to procure the next geothermal, which is why I need the list of names. Individual projects then have their own business cases to go through and own board meetings and all the rest of it. And then the last principle that we're working to is the body that can manage the risk carries the risk. Now, I might explain that a bit further, but risk management is the core of all this approach. So the funding options we're trying to provide for trusts, we at NH Power are trying to provide for trusts, and Carbon Energy Fund have a large part of the solution for that. The first one is getting contractors to fund schemes, and we repay the whole scheme through a power purchase agreement. So on the right-hand side, you've got the price makeup of a unit of heat, a kilowatt hour of heat, and it'll have a finance element, depending on how much capital is involved, have a risk element. If the contractor's funding, it'll be a big risk element, and if you do it another way, it could have less. Then you've got O&M and life cycle that's associated with whatever you use, and then there's probably a management and measurement and verification element of the price, and that makes up your unit heater price that goes into your power purchase agreement. So obviously, if you can affect any of those elements, then you can drive down the energy cost. So the first option, the contractor funds it, we repay it through a PPA and pay that entire price, whatever it is. It could be 12p a unit, it could be less, could be more. It could be collaboratively funded by us getting funding together, and this is where David Mackey's come in, because he's put together models that allow us to collaboratively fund these schemes at a lower interest rate. So we're attacking the finance element in dark blue, and if you can reduce that, then a unit price, the heat goes down, and you don't have to fund the capital because we'll get somebody else to do the capital. And the last option is we do collaborative funded and collaborative risk sharing, which then takes out the risk element of the cost. So we might get there. I don't know that we'll get there in one step, because getting people to share risks is tricky. Okay, and risks. The problem with funding is, of course, management of risks, because you can fund anything where the funder is certain they'll get repaid, and that's called bankability. So if a scheme's bankable, the funder can fund it, and they know they'll get repaid, and you can do it. The geothermal, it's depending on the type of geothermal. If it's the Seraphy system, it's 6 to 9 months into the scheme when they've done their feasibility. If it's BGS type aquifer geothermal, it's 2 years in when we spent £1.5 million. So it's a bit further in, then it becomes bankable. For hydrogen or green gas like biomethane, it's bankable when the gas supply is assured and the price is known. At that point, you can fund it, whatever you need to fund in terms of connecting, converting boilers, converting CHP engines, anything you want to do, because that's the only way to have CHP in a green way. And then electrification is fundable when you have a viable financial model. And I put viable in dark because electrification is not viable really without grant funding, unless you can get the seasonal COP higher than about 3.5. And the NHS seasonal COPs we've got at the moment are all in the range of 1.6 to 2.5. So it's costing trust money, and therefore it's not viable without grant. Okay, I'm nearly ready to hand over to David, so I'll be able to shut up. So how do we get to bankability? Well, we have this problem of this upfront cost. And one way is to roll the cost into the project, where the contractor takes the risks associated with it. We say, well, we'll work with you, contractor. We don't know if there's any heat below the ground, but that's your specialty. You carry the risk of the feasibility and the work and the upfront work. And we go through various risk gateways until we get to a point where it's fundable, and the banker steps in, pays back anybody who needs paying back, and then goes from that point on. And under that scenario, the contractor takes all the risk associated with the geothermal or the hydrogen or the district heating, and the trust, and this might be the same for you or partially for you if you're a council, the trust takes the risks associated with the procurement, the governance of getting this all approved, the longevity, i.e. will their hospital still be there and what form will it be in? And if they just plain lose interest, and that could be anybody in the approvals chain, just loses interest in whatever technology, that risk stays with the trust. But the specialist risk stays with the contractor, so that's rolling the costs into the project. The second way is to try and set up a rolling fund. Dr. Mullen's very keen on this. David might say more about it, I'll leave that to him. But even if he sought 15 million, and the idea was that would cover the sort of 1.5 million to get a scheme going, and then we pay it back from the schemes that got going. But truthfully, the risks haven't gone, they're just being shared, and then one of them went bust. Then the fund will no longer be 15 million because we would have lost 1.5 or 2 million, and we'd have to pump it up from someone else. So actually, a rolling fund really is a way of just sharing that upfront risk. But I'm going to shut up now, and I'm going to pass over to David Mackey of the CEF. I haven't got David's slides, so David, you need to take over the screen. Can you do that?
Yeah. Working?
Yes, sorry.
Hi, I'm David Mackey from the Carbon Energy Fund. I'm not going to talk through are the approaches I've taken probably the last 12 to 18 months with regarding to funding of geothermal projects as such. So everything's been developed with myself as CEF, and also with Keir Mullen, the cross-party parliamentary lead for geothermal, and also all the approaches I'm going to talk about in the first couple of bits have been developed with ourselves, Treasury, UK Infrastructure Bank, who's effectively Treasury, and it forms part of the wider piece of work that's gone up towards the Right Honourable Claire Coutinho, who's Secretary of State of Energy Security Net Zero, or DAESNES as is generally held. The following presentations we held, we also put through the approach just before Christmas, which was accepted, and then ultimately they're trying to get a lot of the grant money in the spending review in March, but that's now moved towards DAESNES and PSTS to seek the grant money. As part of the wider process, we also presented to Lord Markham, Parliament Under Secretary of State, Department of Health and Social Care, who agreed with the overall proposal. We have letters backing this up and various other stuff, and they will support this process. The process I'm going to talk about, the CEF process, but you'll find out quite soon there is no additional money to do this within the NHS how it currently stands. And part of that process, to find additional money for grant funding, which will be with various meetings with Paul Chambers, who's the Deputy Director of Decarbonisation, who is the Senior Responsible Officer for Public Sector Decarbonisation Scheme, and Cantor Moke, who's Head of Market Growth of Daysnays, and he has sat through various Clercatino meetings and presentations and policy papers that we've written. We tried to get money out of PSDS for this year, but currently it was all fully allocated. And there was a bit of haggling between government about who ultimately would potentially fund the early stages of these type of projects. The general opinion is that they want to do, and there's a current piece of work ongoing at the minute, led by Cantor Mocket, to see if we can get grant money on outside of basically come some new money from government, which is currently underway. And then Keir Mullen has worked with us throughout this process. This is the initial process that we put forward. They worked probably a year on, so it is quite specific, and it's in a way slightly different to stuff that Clive has talked about. Because to do this type of process, you need a level of scale. You have your option. You can go with one contractor who will take all the risk and fund all the project and do it all themselves, if they're willing to do that. But ultimately, the contractor will be taking 100% risk on that project. And if they're taking 100% risk, they're going to factor that risk in with the equity type payments that they're going to receive to do that. So ultimately, it's going to be considerably more expensive. And I would say funding projects for these type of things, even at scale, can be quite easy. But it has to be very profitable. You generally have to have some level of your own capital, and there has to be zero risk. And sadly, geothermal is not that thing. It's not that beast. It has a level of risk. To make it viable, you need a long-term return. You need a long-term contract. And to make it really viable, you have to get more like real money insurers and pension fund investors to come in to try and do this. So this is the model that we developed. So this is the CEF model that went into Lord Markham and the head of Daysnays, and that was to look at, with Treasury support, that we would put a number of projects, and then we basically create a company that could be funded, and that could work, and that would be part Treasury, part private sector funded, and then that would ultimately share the entire risk between those 10 projects. So you'd end up with a merged heat price to 10 off-takers, or that could be 10 hospitals or 7 hospitals, 2 councils. It doesn't really matter as long as there's a public sector off-taker, and within there we can make it work. Then, but doing that allows us to bring longer term investors in and various other things that would make it for that considerably more financially viable. Because the risk, if you're taking a risk on, if you're doing 10 projects and one doesn't work, then you're only taking 10% risk. You're not actually taking 100% risk, which allows us to bring in grant money, equity money, and various other things to make that work. So ultimately, what you'd end up with a collaboration of a number of public sector off-takers, and then from that you could develop that into the wider private sector as well, once that's understood. But what we can't ignore is a bit alluded to earlier, is that with geothermal, you have a high level of risk on your first couple of years to find out if you're an established project, if it's something that people are invest in, because in these projects you are looking somewhere between 20 to 30 million just to develop a project, to actually build out a project, with 1 to 1.5 million of upfront work that need to be done to understand if that project's actually viable, investable. And hence the reason why we've been working with Daysnays and government to try and understand if we can get the 10 to 15 million of grant money to actually take that level of risk away, which is currently on the process. Because if you haven't got that, then you're into equity, and then you got to think about, if you have equity, if you're taking equity on one project, then you're taking all 100% equity risk. If you have a collaboration with multiple off-takers, and then the performance risk, the depth, the heat risk, all the sort of stuff was all put together, then you're taking a 10 to 15 million pound risk on a 250 million pound potentially project. And also, out of that 10 to 15 million, what are you actually risking? Is it 7, maybe out of that 15 projects you go to, 10 of them are viable, 8 or 9 of them work how they should work? then you're actually only taking £8 to £9 million equity risk on 250 million, which all of a sudden makes the metrics stand up to investors. So develop this slightly forward. The CEF option 1 would be a shared geothermal structure where we create like what I said previously, we would create a company that would have utilities, SPV, or community company. I think it'd be a lot of mileage in how we could potentially create a community project SPV, which can be, so we could put together a number of geothermal projects for local authority or NHS trusts. And then we could actually share that. So any profit over and above cost of delivering heat, what would normally pay, we potentially reinvest. And that can also be redone to take away risk on projects not operating how they should, and also the ability to reinvest that money into new geothermal projects. And also we've got to consider, if the water comes out of the ground as a geothermal project, you still have to get that into the hospital, you still have to get it into the university or local authority building or private sector building. So there is a high level of retrofit that needs to be done. So on a geothermal project, you could be looking at 20-30 million geothermal, anywhere between 3 to 10 million retrofit per project. And this is ultimately what we put forward to government, treasury, and various other stuff. So you could be looking, probably 20 to 30% of your overall capital cost be paid on retrofit. The good news is CEF is doing that already. We have done this across 50, 60 hospitals and on retrofit, and we've done local authorities, Manchester City Council, District Heat Network. And I could also say we're currently procuring 6 geothermal projects. 3 are currently in operation, and one of them is currently in construction, which has got a 10 well site at QMC. So we have a lot of the retrofit side done, ready to go. The general opinion from Treasury is that they're not going to put any more money into that. They wouldn't even fund this because CEF can do it already. So it's not bringing in new capital, so they're not interested. However, working on the left side and the outside the fence, they are interested, because we need to get to the point where we bring real money investors in to these sort of projects, because then we end up with rates that are less than Bank of England base rate. And then we can make it viable and extend it out through the wider UK PLC. And I suppose the other way of looking at it is, if you look at it as a collaboration of a number of local authorities and hospitals to work together to create a company, geothermal specific company. And again, the CEF option 2 is to look at, you need to reconsider, maybe look at the funding mix if you're working together as a hospital and say you go site specific. So if I say, for example, Southampton Hospital and Southampton Council, I'll just use an example because it's currently a CEF project, you could look at the wider funding mix and how you could work together outside of geothermal. And the logic behind that is, how do you make it investable, and how do you get best value for money for the public sector? And that's by taking a slightly different approach, because you can look at authority capital, potentially you have NHS trust capital. If you take a number of technologies, which could include geothermal, it could include solar, battery storage, anything with and non-domestic energy efficiency, you name it, we can put in there. And we're doing a funding mix with with public sector capital, PSDS. Let's say CEF have really secured over 600 million of PSDS capital for the NHS. Green Heat Network funding, which is 50% grant, 50% third-party investor. Trailblazer PSDS funding, which is looking at public and private sector money and funding to bring in private sector. Infrastructure Bank we've talked about, and then CEF itself has access to £1 billion worth of capital from household name insurers like Standard Life, Legal and General, who are all got a big wall of capital to invest in these projects. If you get that all together, what you're actually doing is minimizing the risk. And because you're spreading the risk and spreading the term across the risk, because the geothermal project could be up and going in, it'll be 2 years before you're ready to invest, 4 or 5 years before you're ready to take heat. A solar, you could be done within 12 months. And then you start getting revenue streams, you alternative revenue streams and stuff coming through, which makes it the larger investors to make it viable to them. And it also makes the ability to transfer that risk to private sector contractors. So that's written the 15-30-year blended terms. And then CEF itself, because I'm told it's CEF, we have an off-balance sheet investment committee approved contract, which has been done in the UK, and also the only one of its type, the DEPCs in the entire the EU. So that takes away a lot of the issues from the public sector. And if you look at all the approvals from Days Nays and House of Lord Markham, there's basically, it cannot be on balance sheet. There is no capital for it. It has to be done in a way that allows you to do that. And the CEF itself, will provide value procurement compliance and deployment and certainty. So to develop that a bit slightly, this is a different version of what we talked before. And this is all about how do you get as a community, or take example Southampton, you would look at what you could do in the wider community and wrap it all up into almost like an SPV type approach, and that could be a community model. So the hospital benefits, local authority benefits, we can reinvest back into the wider community to green the community. So geothermal would form part of that. Assuming that's why everyone's here. So geothermal, there's the NS Power putting out the geothermal framework, so you get access into that, and then you potentially procure a geothermal project, or you could do it yourselves. Like everything in all this, it's very much optional. Then if you start to tie in hydrogen, solar, even car park solar, offsite, energy efficiency, district heating, you name it, then you're starting to bring in a whole mix of, back to what I said before, grant funding, third-party investors, minimizing the equity, minimizing the risk. And then you can then provide gas, electric, and heat back into the NHS or wider community. And then that retrofit, especially with the NHS and various other stuff we've done with Manchester City Council and others, we can provide the framework to get the retrofit. So when it comes out, when the power or heat or whatever comes in through back through the company and stuff, then we need to get that the ability to mechanically and electrically use that within the community. Yeah, so there's £1 billion worth of finance in 10 minutes.
Well done. Can we have the money just this fast there, David?
So has anyone any questions?
Ali Khan has had his hand up the whole time, so it might be that he's after speaking to me. Apologies for just leaving you with your hand up there, Ali. Do you want to just say your question? And I've been answering some questions, so the Carbon Energy Fund might want to check the answers I'm putting out there to make sure they're okay. And then we'll take questions either verbally or otherwise. Ali, are you still with us? Not sure. Right. Anybody else got? Okay, David.
Sorry, that was by mistake. I'm sorry for that.
Okay, that's fine. Philip Davis, you've got your hand up. You want to say what your question is?
Yeah, you may have already covered this because I joined a bit late, but the grid and the state of power supply security at the moment is a constraint to electrification. Obviously, all of us understand that. I wonder whether you've considered that in the slides you've just showed us. We'll have to bring on board the district network operators, pretty major overhauls of the power grid in some areas, or be generating it locally if that's not possible, and replacing CHPs. I don't know if you had any kind of perspective on that.
We've tended to cover those in the more detailed workshops, but the problems of HV and electrification are well understood in the NHS, and we've got schemes that are delayed for forever, for ages. We've got with this, and that's a driver for going for the options that don't use a lot of HV. And to be honest, the revenue impact on our hospitals can be $500,000 a year, for the electrification. We have sites like that. Right, okay. There are videos of the other sessions where we discuss a bit more of that. We've got, there's one about how we optimize heat pumps to try and make them more efficient. That might be worth you looking at. We've had a few questions from balance sheet treatment. David, I'll probably on slightly thin ice here, but you've got some projects going where you're doing off-balance sheet work with the hospitals. Are you prepared to say anything about those?
Yeah, so who's asked the question? Is it a council or NHS?
It's a university. Sorry, hospital, I think. Yes, it's a hospital, I think.
Yeah, there's a couple of answers to this really. One is, if you're talking specifically about geothermal, then you're in reality you're going from outside the fence to the hospital. The hospital would be buying a heat purchase agreement, and that could be a heat purchase agreement, reserve service contract, whatever it needs to be, which means it would be off balance sheet. There'd be the separate approach. There is no direct loans to the NHS at all. So I mean, and that's quite specific. The UK Infrastructure Bank can't even lend to the NHS. They can't lend to universities. It is a certain amount of restriction. But using the approach where we go have an SPV and then the retrofit CEF, that works. Because I say there is no loans, there's no debt, there's nothing within there that would initially put it on balance sheet. The other stuff we are doing, we have done multiple off balance sheet funded solutions in the NHS over the last 10 years. Not in the last couple of years, mainly because we had £600 million worth of free money. So that's all within the PSD, multiple sites across the NHS. But now we're back into a mix of both PSDS and service agreements, where it's effectively funded by the contractor and various other stuff. So that's currently all currently going forward as off balance sheet. We will know more specifically in the next couple of months, I would think. Because all the stuff has gone through, everything is there, everything is, all the variables are all currently underway. But until the auditor turns around and says it's on or off, you don't know. You probably get through that. And then also I'm currently working quite in depth with Northern Ireland. They have no access to any grant funding at all, and we're putting off balance sheet solutions in there. And we're currently working everything up to Permanent Undersecretary, Department of Health, NHS, and that we're actually been given the Northern Ireland Audit Office to work through the off balance sheet solutions for them for an NHS hospital. So that's a big piece of work that's been undergone for the last 12 months.
But I'm an electrical engineer, so I can speak very confidently about balance sheet. It boils down to it mustn't be yours in any measurable form. So if it's geothermal heat, you want at least 10% going to somebody else. That's why every hospital that does geothermal really needs to work, if not with the council or some other users nearby, so that asset is a shared asset with financial risk carried for the external sales carried by somebody else. And so that we can say in substance over form that is definitely an off-balance sheet solution. But there's a lot else, and we've got accountants busy chatting to each other very animatedly, and I've seen lots of very impressive diagrams that are going through proving that that's the case.
I mean, it's also, pick up Clive's point, it's not purely, if you're going to do one of these projects, it's not really as much, adding additional people in that could take heat from the geothermal is not just purely a balance sheet thing, because you're diversifying your risk for the people putting in the geothermal. The hospital or council can buy the heat direct, but also that heat can then be sold on into district heat network, and the heat network can go around to low sub-economic homes, you name it, all that sort of stuff. I mean, years ago at a district heat network, we went to 1,500 homes in London, of which are going to and sub-economic status. So there's a lot of other stuff that can be done with that. And it also drives down ultimately your heat price, because when you go to the private sector, ultimately you can sell it to them for more than you can as a public sector. So then you start to drive down your overall price for the wider network. So there's lots of stuff that can be done with there, and then it makes your balance sheet treatment even makes it easier, really.
Okay, and thanks to Steve Lowndes, who's given a bit more about electrification and geothermal. So there's a bit more answering there. So we've been answering stuff on there. How are we doing for questions? Is everybody kind of like zoned out with all the talking, or are the questions still lurking? There's a question about the slides. Okay, right. Valentin, do you want to fire away?
Yeah, thanks. So sorry if it's already been covered in one way or another, but the comments are made about baseline of doing nothing. So I think effectively the risk and the cost associated with that over, say, the next 10, 20 years has is there been like a one-to-one comparison with that and a district heating implementation for a trust and maybe a council within an area?
So, Valentin, we've done a model for your hospital, so or at least one of your hospitals, where we've modelled it against the 4 different options that exist for it. And the base, there is in the model, there's the base. You can choose the baseline of doing absolutely nothing, which will get your trust into hot water because the targets are mandatory. And then we've put a do minimum option in, which is the cheapest, most simple heat pump solution we can conceive, and have treated that as the baseline.
Yes,
So
sorry, I meant for the whole of the country. So if you're NHS England and you have n number of hospitals, very high level figures, but how do those comparisons exist? Because we're struggling so much to justify the money, and this is why I guess we're here. But
well, you hit a very good point, Valentin. The NHS England's handling that, and it's in their strategy, and it's in the work that's coming out centrally. But it's such high level, it's not really useful, because you sit there trying to get the investment and get your business case through, and the information that's there isn't good enough. And that's why we've got together and we've got modelling done. And to be honest, the Carbon Energy Fund have been very helpful in that, so that we can model trust and give you what you need for us, what's in the NHS called a SOC, a strategic outline case, so that you can write a SOC. I also have an exemplar from University Hospital Dorset, if you want it, Valentin, which you can take that and your model and use the two together. That's what I mean by sharing stuff, and it'll give you a beginning of a paper that you can put to the board. And if that allows you to move forward, then we will help you with the more detailed outline business case and the FBC later on. But the central stuff, such as the BGS have done, and you can see that information, it's in their white paper, and I'm pretty sure I've emailed it to you at some point, then that it's not very helpful to your case. Okay, this is looking very good.
Yeah, I was going to say, just drop us a note. I mean, we're currently working with you guys. We've done the viabilities and various other stuff already. As Seth, so we can, we just have a discussion about it and see what you need. Because some of it might have been done, you might have some of it already, but it probably through a different part of the hospital. I mean, and then we can bring Stephen in. Stephen developed all this modelling, and we were looking at what is the actual cost, the cost of doing a geothermal, what is the cost of geothermal against cost of actually doing what you hit your bare minimum by 2030, which is using heat pumps and various other stuff. So there's a lot of stuff we can expand out and try and help you with your business case. Plus, we also done a speed rate a lot of the business cases anyway, so we can sort of help with that.
Yeah, thanks. It was mainly just a very, very high level overview, which I got inside now. So yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I'll be honest with those slides. That slide number 4 that I just showed there is what went to Lord Markham. So that's that went in with in front of NHS England, British Geological Society, everyone, and that was the underlying business case that they used for that. And then he just asked me to demonstrate what the yield was and various other stuff. So. And that was done as part of the whole presentation at the House of Lords. So there's not some of this is not new, and this is also what went into Right Honourable Claire Coutinho and various other stuff to look at it on an individual project level. And then we've looked at that, expanded that out based on a if you actually went, there's identified as 100 sites potentially within NHS. Hence the reason why, if you look at the other slide, a sign of 250 million. This is a pilot of 10. We're actually looking at 2.5 billion to £1 billion retrofit opportunity, which is all the greater piece that's been happening over the last 12 months specifically. But I didn't want to hit you with all 2.5 billion and 1 billion because people get a bit shocked. But that was the reality of what's going on with us and government at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, somebody's asked about business cases. Yes, we're not excuse the business cases, but we will help with those, such as I described, sharing documents and information, and that's why the financial modelling has been so useful. We've got that. Have we got any more questions? We've got a few minutes left of the slot. David, you've got your hand up.
That was just really for some general.
A bit faint there, David. Is there any way of jacking it up a bit?
Yeah, sorry, that's me. Sorry, yeah, my question was really just so as a hospital, we've got two sort of projects running side by side. One is that we need to de-steam and to get rid of our CHPs and to do a whole lot of that, and the other is to then source heat from somewhere, so geothermal. So we've got two separate bids kind of running simultaneously and potentially two separate off-balance sheet projects. Do you have any advice on how you manage that? Do you go for one first and then the other, or do you do them simultaneously, or do you try and combine it into one massive kind of project?
Personally, I would make one massive one, and I would because the one will help the other. But David, do you have a view?
I think the general opinion from Lee, you still on the call?
Yeah, I'm on the call.
I think you're closer to Newcastle than I am, not geographically, obviously.
No, I'm far less.
Just give an update where we are.
Yeah, sure, absolutely, David. We've shared emails. Yeah, where we are, I think there was a complicated when we first started talking. It was around CF and what we can do with the D-steam and the CHP.
Yeah.
Absolutely right. And then the geothermal come into place. And I think there was not so much confusion, but I think it's a complexity going to the board, and then putting you in the position of is it one or the other. Now that's probably the exact opposite that what we're trying to do is to make anybody choose either route. So which is absolutely key. So the business case and everything we supported you with is to make sure that all the measures we look at is like the holistic. I hate that word, but I'm going to use it. Is the whole piece. So we look at every measure that goes into the case, because what we don't want to do is provide that divide. So we look at every measure that goes forward, and geothermal being part of it. It does have its own complexities, but yeah, that's what we would suggest. But again, it's a trust decision, and we're here to support and understand some of the nervousness probably from the board.
I think it's a little bit of a chicken and egg type situation for us, in that we can't go to the board to ask for funding when we don't know whether the geothermal would be there, or whether we need to go with a city heat network, and we don't know what that city heat work might look like because they happen simultaneously. So I think our approach is that we have to separate them, because we need to progress with both, and the complexity of doing that independently is possibly less than the complexity of putting them together. And yeah, I know we're dealing with it in detail. I was just wondering if there was generic advice for everyone else, really. So.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. It's the core scheme. I think the core scheme where we are, what we don't want to do is we start off with that same conversation. It's the core scheme, and then it can develop.
Yeah, I think because it's almost like what we're talking about is what you mentioned, sort of this slide here, where we have what we're currently looking at, the bit on the right, which is the energy measures, all the stuff with the D-steam that you need to do anyway. And then part of that, we will look at the other aspects that can be bring in, because the stuff the geothermal, hydrogen, solar, you name it, it's not, you've taken in different factors which are sort of outside of your control, and it means engaging with different parties and various other stuff. And is it going to be financially viable? We don't know yet until we do a level of work. But it doesn't stop. You still got 2040, you still got 2032, and you've got a level of work that you have to do to get that part of the hospital ready. And I think that's the approach we're sort of taking so far.
Yeah. So you could carry on working on are you going to get hydrogen? I don't think you are in the short term. Is there potential for solar? Is there potential for geothermal? You can work on all that, narrowing those risks down whilst you get on with doing your site. Because the only option that can stymie you is possibly hydrogen. And really, if you're going to put your net zero hopes on hydrogen, you should work for Bet 888 or whatever they're called. I think.
Yeah, because it is like, I mean, you could look at geothermal and go, is that financially viable? Just about, it just squeaks in. But then you go, well, is it financially viable? The district heat network, bring it in the local authority. Then all of a sudden you're up 10, 15%, you're now getting more comfortable. Then you're at geothermal district heat network, local with the university, and then also a couple of private sector factories, and all of a sudden you're viable. And that's a piece of work that we will work with you to do. We've done that in the past for numerous people. So it's getting there. It's a case of putting it to get there, but it doesn't really, that's what we'd love to happen. But the reality is you've got to do the other bit irrespective.
Yeah.
Okay, we've more or less used up our time, but we've got time for a question or two more. Anything else? I'm looking through the chat to see if there's anything there. I think we've more or less covered stuff there. Okay. We have councils and trusts on board. Have you guys looked down the attendees? Any matchmaking we can do is a really good thing. We'll help with that. So we've asked councils whether they'd be interested in joining. So joining up with their hospitals. Philip, we got something? Got your hand up?
Yeah. One last question that we've been wrestling with here is: do we, as a hospital, take this alone and develop it on our site with land that we've got, or do we partner? We've looked at both in parallel. So partner with councils and large landowners, etc., big consumers of energy. We're mindful that the cost of heat piping is enormous. Is there a kind of rule of thumb for how long a heat network can be, or has your modelling kind of looked at heat networks that way? In other words, do you have to have stuff really on top of each other to make it viable or not?
No, you can go several kilometres. The Rotherham system is several kilometres long. I don't know. I'm just trying to pull up the slide. It's not the world's most illuminating, so I'll just.
We got an estimate of, I think, £1,000 a metre, or up to £1,000 a metre.
Oh well, what I would suggest, because you're not going to cover it, is I think you should work with an idea of what's you need to do on your site, and then what you'd like from outside the site, and then we'll ask commercial bodies who can carry the risk associated with this. So this one, this site in Rotherham starts at the far end of town at taking waste off a biomass plant. There's about 10 kilometres of piping going all the way through the council and then out to the hospital, which is bottom right. So it's going several kilometres isn't too problem. This one has got the district heating system is 80 million, and they managed to get 25 million of grant towards it. And that's enough to make the thing add up. I say the only obstacle at the moment is actually on site on the hospital side, where the return temperatures are a big problem and making it difficult to do the hospital part of it. So that's what we're trying to solve there at the moment.
Personally, I would look at it holistically. Because as a hospital, you're in sort of, well, you're in sort of a position. You're one of the few organisations going to take heat 24/7. And then you effectively got a level of quasi sovereign guarantee because you are one below government for your credit rating. So you are there is a lot of, you can use that almost like a cornerstone for a wider project. And then if the geothermal comes out that you get more heat, more than you can actually use, then you have the opportunity to extend out of that and then into the district heat networks and various other stuff, which goes back to the other slide. That brings you in the opportunity for other types of grant funding. Then you get into other heat network funding and all various other stuff that we can bring in based on that. And then even if you start to bring in further PSDS funding, if you go for a wider project, as such, and then that's working with your local authority. You're the two main players, and if you work good geothermal here and a number of council buildings buy it here, if this can cover off a big chunk of what your heat network is, and then you can get grant funding because effectively you got practically low carbon heat, zero carbon heat, low carbon heat, and then so that fits within the certain grant boundaries for other types of grant that you're not reliant on PSDS, which won't fund it really, or you're not reliant on trust capital or purely on private investors. That gives us a chance to bring in other people, and then if you extend the network out, and then all of a sudden we can get more people tap into the network, then all of a sudden that's de minimis on the amount you're going to have to pay for the district heat network. So there is quite a lot of stuff there that you can do, and then if you, as I say, if you're going to put solar and various stuff in there as well. It does make it can make it easier.
Okay.
But if you try to cost the whole thing on your own, Philip, I think you're going to go mad.
Yeah,
so we've modelled the sites, and hopefully you've got a model of your site, and it should give you the idea of how much you would have to sell to make it viable if it's geothermal and
you think,
blah 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 for the other options.
You can actually work out. Your 1,000 pound of meat is not far wrong. It's a bit scary. You got £3 million worth of district heat network to get it out to the council, whatever the number is. But it's almost become not that relevant because you don't know what the heat off takers are. And then once you get the heat off takers, then you can then you sort of work. You know what your heat map is, what the heat off takers are, what are actually viable, and then but to do that, you also need to look at what is their current cost of heat, and then what the current plant that they have to retain and keep or maintain over the next many years to work out your actual heat price. And then from that, you will have almost like the sales side of your heat network, and then you can start work back from that. And then does your district heat network is that actually viable? And then so there's different stuff to do, but starting from just as a hospital would be. I was going to say good luck with that one because
have we got time for one super quick question? Have we still got time?
Yeah, people need to go.
Okay, it is quick. What are you assuming will be the heat network temperatures in hospitals? Are you assuming you take hot water out of the ground? It might be 50,
85 degrees.
Okay, so you're going to step it up if it's coming out of the ground colder.
Yeah.
If that's the case, yes.
Okay,
but
so you won't have to change heat emitters and infrastructure that's existing today.
That might be what's required. So in Rotherham, that isn't the problem. In Rotherham, the problem in Rotherham is the return temperatures are too high, which, to be honest, is a very common NHS problem. That's what we've got to fix there. In terms of hospitals, it depends whether you're reliant on air handling units, which are relatively easy to do, or whether you're actually relying on individual radiators, which becomes then a real pain in the bum. Yeah. So it's a question of how much of one and how much of the other you have.
All right,
and we might well find a mixed economy where you're taking geothermal heat and then topping some of it up either with heat pumps or hydrogen or whatever to get it to where you want. Yeah, but the future is going to be require much more management. That's why there's a management element to that prize.
I mean, Philip, drop us a note because we're currently doing QMC, which is a low depth 10 site geothermal project feeding out through the wider hospital, and that's currently in construction. And then Salisbury, we have the site which is currently under investigation, PSS grant funded, which is again so. Our guys have got all that sort of information that they're currently
helpful
and from live hospitals that we're currently working on, not just theoretical.
Yeah. Okay, Robin's put some congratulations about Bath. I think Bath are looking at geothermal, David. I think they are. It certainly ought to be, given that Bath.
Yeah, we're just about we sourced by 26 million of grant funding for Bath for PSDS, which is now currently fully procured, and that's currently in construction. And then it's like a similar sort of thing. It's sort of back to your point, we're getting over the whole. There's a 25-30, but the trust contribution, probably £28 million project, which is a complete retrofit ongoing now. And then once that's underway, then we're looking at the additional, if we can add in geothermal into the wider energy mix.
Okay. Well, by all means, stay on and keep asking questions if you want. I'm kind of aware that I've used up the time I asked for, but it's been really nice to have you there. If you're a council and you want to work with a hospital, or a hospital want to work with a council, let me know. Let me know anything you've half done, anything helps, and I'll try and matchmake together. If you want to get hold of the Carbon Energy Fund, just drop us a message and we can get them to talk to you.
Yeah, maybe add to that. I think because when we did one of the original heat networks, we took waste heat off a gas turbine. This was like 14 years ago.
You're talking about London, yes. It was.
Yeah. And
must be probably 15 years ago now. Yeah,
I think I had hair when I started. But it was but that was a similar thing. We took waste heat off the back of an energy centre, fed that in out to a district heat network, works with the council, fed it to 1,500 homes. And that was so that we had the work combined with both, which is good. And then also the solar project Clive mentioned, which is 6.5 megawatt offsite solar at New Cross. which is currently situated on we lease the land off the council. So that was land that was it was part of it was waste disposal, I believe.
Oh, the dump, the council
yeah,
dump.
I was trying to put it nicer.
Yeah, we just say dump. We all know that.
Yeah, it was a covered dump. Then we actually leased the land from the council. And then they're providing 6.5 megawatt private wire through solar into the hospital. So all that stuff, I think, is available. And I think, from my point of view, there's biggest issue with this stuff is that you have to get the capital in to do this because there is no money to do it from government. Maybe we may get some grant money to a certain point. So you have to get people who are willing, and there's a big wall of capital to invest in this stuff, really. And they do a little bit done off balance sheet, or you name it, risk transfer to private sector, all that stuff. But you have to make it at a scale. The bigger the scale, the easier it is to do. Because the people who you really want to fund this stuff don't look at anything less than 25 million. But if you look at a number of projects together and working together, you actually minimize the risk, get more people interested in it, and then you've also you're actually taking less risk for the contractors. So they're more likely to put equity in, which might negate the need for grant funding. So it's just making. And I lend money to stuff, so that's probably why I like big projects. But the reality is that's
so
true.
we've got Peter Graham, we dialogue with the trust regarding district heating project out to market for fund operator, welcome support, getting agreement. Yeah, they can do that. We're certainly planning to go to market with district heating schemes. So where we have partnerships who want help with that, we'll help with the market phase. But Peter, if your system wants funding, wants to do it, then you now know who to talk to about helping you with that. So where I assume it says external, I thought it said Exeter. If it was Exeter, for instance, there are 2 hospitals and then there's the council, so there's potential for quite a decent sized scheme.
Exeter, I was involved there.
It isn't Exeter, it's just the way it's cut off. It says external, so I don't know which.
Oh, okay, I thought Exeter. I was going to say,
yeah,
Sunderland. Green Investment Bank down there about 7 or 8 years ago, I think.
Yeah, so Sunderland. Well, there are lots of potential in Sunderland. Yeah, thanks, Peter, for that one. Yeah, we'd like to. I'd like to help you there if we can, and we're certainly working with Newcastle at the moment. I know from football that, and I'm not footballing at all. Sunderland and Newcastle have tensions, so we say, but I'm sure you get on as trust. Right, we got anything else? Okay, if any of you want sessions, there've been questions about sessions and stuff, I'll happily set them up. If it looks like it's something that'll be of general interest. I'm certainly keen to get the council going. And of course, first the priority is to get the geothermal going, because I've got to go through Cabinet Office at the end of the month and all that kind of stuff. And then I'm going to look at the hydrants. I've got the HyNet session set up. And then as soon as I've got that, then I'm hoping we'll start getting some working groups of councils and hospitals together, so I can do some workshops and get people together at IHEM in Manchester if they can make it. Lots to do. So thank you all very much. If you don't put your hand up, then there's no more questions, and we're going to let you go. So thank you for that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Clive.